Hey, everybody. Good evening, and welcome to the New Press's virtual gala. What's Next, America? I'm Gary LaMarche, the chair of the New Press Board of Directors. I want to thank all of our generous partners, sponsors, and co-chairs, Sarah Burns and Debbie and Jonathan Klein. The New Press is a vital institution, now more than ever, but we would not exist without your commitment to TNP's mission. Your support helps progressive ideas move from the margins to the mainstream of political discourse. We rose to the occasion during the first Trump administration. Now we're prepared to go to the barricades again. We gather here tonight to contemplate our next moves for the New Press, for our communities, and for the country. Thanks so much for joining us for a political salon right in your own home. And I don't know, with the blurred background, I don't know if you'll see this, but I hope you all have a festive beverage to guide us through the rest of the evening, as I do. We come together not only to reflect on the election results, but especially to discuss a pathway forward, which is why we've called this What's Next. During the years that I've been involved with the New Press, years ago as a funder when I was at Open Society in Atlantic, and more recently as a board member and then board chair, I'm consistently amazed by the impressive set of people who are part of the New Press community. From the beginning, an all-star team of thinkers, writers, and activists. We're very honored to have some of them supporting the New Press by participating as featured guests tonight. And I'll introduce each of them and say a bit about them in a moment. But before that, we're really pleased to have Joy Reid of MSNBC, who's going to welcome us all and set the context for what we're doing tonight. So let me turn it over to Joy.
Hello, all. I'm Joy Reid, and welcome to What's Next, America. We're all still processing what happened on Election Day and what it tells us about our country. Well, tonight, I hope we can pivot to looking forward, thinking about what the big battlegrounds will be, how we can confront this regressive wave, and what steps each of us can take to resist harmful policies, protect the most vulnerable among us, and preserve our democracy. The New Press has responded to this before. In 2017, at the start of the first Trump administration, the New Press launched a series of fearless books for perilous times. These were quintessential New Press contributions, books focused on key ideas, solutions, alternative voices, and the perspectives of those targeted for oppression. And of course, the New Press will be commissioning a whole range of new books to speak to the current moment. If you're here tonight, you're already part of the New Press community. You're an activist, a journalist, a thinker, a writer, a supporter of all of the above, who will fight for the next 4 years and beyond. Tonight, we have the privilege of speaking directly to some of the country's leading thinkers who are eager to take your questions and hear your thoughts about what's to come and how we might best respond. They're not here to be talking heads, but to talk with you. These conversations are all unrecorded and off the record, so we will welcome your candid thoughts. I am proud to be a part of this, to show up for Dionne, for my good friend Josanne Lopez, a proud New Press board member, and for the New Press. Thank you for supporting the New Press and enjoy this special opportunity the New Press has made possible.
Thank you very much, Joy. And before I introduce the speakers and ask the speakers to say a few words before we go into the individual salons, I want to introduce Dionne Wachtel, who's the executive director of the New Press, who's been with the New Press since the very beginning in the early 1990s, without whom there would be no New Press, and who is our fearless leader. So Dionne, over to you.
Thank you so much, Gara. And thank you to Joy Reid and to all of you for joining us tonight. I know that there are a lot of longtime friends on the Zoom with us, but also a lot of new faces. So welcome, everybody. I think later in the program, we'll actually have a chance to see each other. The big reason that we're here, of course, is that for the second time in recent memory, the country is facing a jarring push away from basic dignity, human rights, and the rule of law. And I would say it's impossible not to feel at least a little despondent. But coming together with others who care and focusing on what we can do next is a way to build back hope. And staying involved and informed is a big part of that. We know that our opponents ban books. We know that they spread information. We know that they dampen authentic public discourse because a well-informed electorate is their worst nightmare. Here at the New Press, we take that on as a challenge. Our goal is to ignite thought leaders, to tap into their expertise, to help sharpen their insights, and to offer solutions to the country's most daunting issues. Then we can put that information into the hands of everyday people and carry it forward to the halls of power, changing the world one book at a time. As we strategize about meaningful responses to the next 4 years, we'll continue to bring you, wait for it, books with a spine. Do you like that? Books, I love that. Books with a spine that change the conversation. We've been doing this for over 30 years now. We have published more than 1,200 different books. We say that New Press books provide the intellectual scaffolding for social movements. We are a public interest book publisher, and we're unique in the publishing ecosphere. Our mission is to use our books to leverage social change. We have sold many tens of millions of dollars worth of New Press books. We've also given away thousands and thousands of books, and every year we do dozens of free events across the country. So our model requires contributed revenue also. That's what allows us to publish with a social justice mission. We pride ourselves on our ability to see around the corner and to publish books ahead of their time, and then watch as the world catches up. We saw that big time in 2020 in the wake of the George Floyd murder and the protests that followed, when the world turned to our books on critical race theory, structural racism, and police brutality, a whole constellation of issues to explain what was going on in the country. As some of you know, the very first book we published at the New Press was Studs Terkel's book, Race. It was a New York Times bestseller. And I want to say it endowed the New Press in at least 2 different ways, obviously financially, but also, I would say, philosophically. So many of the books we've published since have used a racial justice lens to look at American social issues, and we think that that lens is critical to understanding this country. A couple of years after we published Race, we published Lisa Delpitt's wonderful book, Other People's Children, which was about the cultural slippage between white teachers and children of color in our public school classrooms. We sold hundreds of thousands of copies of that book, and it's become a touchstone for the education reform movement. Then, as many of you know, in 2010, we published Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. That book is widely credited with sparking the criminal justice reform movement, and we've sold millions of copies of that book. In 2017, we published Arlie Hochschild's National Book Award finalist book, Strangers in Their Own Land. That was one of 2 books, the other being J.D. Vance's book, that explained the phenomenon of Donald Trump and why he was attractive to so many people in the country. We've published many books by the guests featured here tonight. I hope you saw some of the slides of the jackets in the waiting room. These all continue to have meaningful impact in academic, professional, and policy circles, in addition to with the general public. So I just want to say that I was completely amazed and humbled when each of our impressive featured guests agreed without hesitation to help us out tonight. I want to thank them for their kindness and generosity, and many thanks to our board chair, Gary LaMarche, for his hard work all year long and for emceeing tonight. Finally, for over 30 years, the New Press has embraced compassion and intelligence against forces committed to hatred and ignorance. And we will do it again in community with you. The only way out is through together. Thank you so much for being here with us, and I look forward to our upcoming conversations.
Thanks so much, Diane, and that is a terrific launch to the next part of this evening. I want to introduce our amazing featured speakers for tonight, and I'm going to give them each a moment to share some opening thoughts with the whole group before we go into our individual salons. We're very lucky tonight to have with us David Cole, Tressie McMillan Cottom, E.J. Dionne, Elie Mystal, Representative Jamie Raskin, and Zephyr Teachout. So we have an opening question for each of them to say a little bit about, which is what are you seeing right now from your work that hasn't been captured by the media and public discourse right now? In other words, what's your take on the situation that hasn't been put out there yet, but needs to be? I want to start with David Cole. David Cole, who was until October 15th, the National Legal Director of the American Civil Liberties Union. He's a frequent contributor to the New York Review of Books and The Nation. He's the author of 6 New Press books. Dionne, you will have to let me know whether that's a record or close to a record, including No Equal Justice, Less Safe, Less Free, and Enemy Aliens. David.
Thanks, Gara, and delighted to be here. I think the thing that is that I find missing in a lot of the discussion is hope. And I actually think there's a lot of reason for hope. Part of the reason for hope that I find for hope is what happened last time. Donald Trump came into office. He had both houses of Congress, and he was unable to do most of what he wanted to do. He wanted to repeal Obamacare. He tried repeatedly in his Republican-controlled Congress to do so. He failed. He imposed all sorts of restrictions on immigration. Many of them were declared illegal by the courts. He sought to put a citizenship question on the census. The courts stopped him. He sought to take away DACA protection from Dreamers. The courts stopped him. By the time he left office, at the midterms already, the Democrats won 41 seats and took control of the House. And by the time he left office, somewhat begrudgingly, he was a shamed person. Remarkably, he came back. My favorite sign I saw at the New York Marathon a couple of weeks ago was, if Donald Trump can run, so can you. And I do think the fact that he was able to turn his fortunes around so dramatically just underscores how quickly things can change. And I think in this country, what makes the checks and balances that are in the Constitution, court review, federalism, the Congress, how hard it is to pass legislation, all of those things, what makes those work is civil society. In other countries, when autocrats come to power, what they do is they target civil society, by which I mean all the institutions that citizens come together in that are non-governmental, from the academy to publishing to the media to the nonprofit sector to religion. These are all groups of people who come together with norms and values that are outside of government, and when challenged, can use those forces to make those checks in our Constitution meaningful. We did it last time. We can do it this time. It's up to us. So what troubles me is this kind of resistance, this mantra about how resistance didn't work. Resistance worked. And yes, people are tired. Of course they're tired. And of course they're despondent right now. But, you can mourn for a little bit, but then you got to organize. And I have faith that that we will push back. We will turn this around. And Donald Trump will leave office in 4 years, with his tail between his legs in much the same way, if not before.
Thanks, David. I like hearing that. And now let me go to Tressie McMillan Cottom. She's a columnist for the New York Times. She's an associate professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. She's also a MacArthur Fellow. She's the co-host of the podcast Here to Slay with Roxane Gay, and the author of 2 new press books, Lower Ed and the National Book Award finalist essay collection, Thick. You might have caught her on the Daily Show, where she was featured just this past week. Tressie?
Real pleasure to be here. Gara, Dionne, everyone for joining us this evening. Of the many types of events like this, what just happened, I want to thank the New Press for shifting our perspective and lens here by asking us instead, what is next? because it tends to be my favorite type of framing. I say this even as I do my professional duty to continue with the postmortems, for which I apologize in advance, but you've got to get through them before they'll let you continue on with your work. So now I am not, I'm afraid, going to be quite as upbeat as David, not because I don't believe in hope, but precisely because it's just not the space where I think I am strongest. So I want to just get off the table here. I always think there's hope. I like to say to people, I am a Black woman who's paid to think and write in public. The very idea of my existence is, I think, evidence of hope. And so because of that, I always give myself a pass on performing it any more than that. Having said that, here's some things that I am thinking about, some of which I do think actually are quite hopeful. We're still very recent. I think people are still in mourning, which might be natural. I, like David and others, worry that that might go on a little too long. But once we get over the mourning, there are a couple things that I hope will become more clear to people. Some things that I think are have become very clear to me. One, I was talking with some state operatives here in North Carolina over the last week. North Carolina has been and continues to be a pretty illiberal state at the moment. But I was talking to a Democratic operative who has done this for many years, and as despondent as he was with the overall results, he had two messages for me. He said, the takeaway here that somehow the Democrats didn't do their job is not exactly right. He said, I've been doing this for many years, and this is the first time that I have had the level of support that I had from both the national and the state Democratic Party to do our work. This matters because he is not in a Democratic stronghold in the state. He is in a sort of rural, working class leaning Alamance County, which is not one of the counties like my own here in Chapel Hill or Mecklenburg County, where I'm from. And he said, so this is the first time where we saw a deep investment in the work that we do here. He said in the day before Tuesday, he drove around and 27 of the 29 precincts in Alamance County were organized, which means that they had a full slate of Democratic representatives welcoming people to the polls. He said that says that we learned a lesson about investing, and particularly investing in communities where we don't normally see it. He said, and it worked. So one of the things that we see here in North Carolina that I think is true in more places across this country than we've yet given full voice to is that voters made some decisions that give us some evidence of their willingness to engage with the ideas that matter to, I suspect, everyone on this call. At the top level, of course, we see sort of vote splitting over the issue of abortion, which I continue to think is interesting. But within this state, we saw a lot of like outsider Democratic candidates win things in like local school board races and various commissioner races. And we're seeing that across the country. What does that say to me? It says to me that whatever Donald Trump captured, and I've got tons of thoughts about what I think he captured. I think he captured some softening around identity. I think that he's extremely strategic and skilled about maximizing his messaging in a fragmented media environment. I think he's just a Republican candidate running in a system that has been rigged for Republican candidates to be competitive no matter what it is that they do. But this local operative said, here's the thing, we voted harder. And nobody is giving us credit for that. He said the Democrats in this state and across the country voted harder. I said, well, then what happened? He said, well, Donald Trump's message cut through. And here's a little asterisk I'm going to put on this. I do think that something I hope that we'll talk more about over the coming weeks and months is what messaging looks like, not in this sort of, I think, simple sense that we sometimes think about in the discourse, which is who has a better slogan, who is sloganeering, who perhaps maybe is pandering, but what is the message that so many millions of voters did not hear in this election that resulted in the overall electorate actually shrinking? It just shrunk slightly less for Trump than it did for the Democrats with Harris-Walz. But there are a lot of voters out there that did not hear anything that resonated with them. And I think that our lesson here for everyone, especially those of us in social institutions responsible for the social reproduction of those messages, myself in academia and in media, how can we do a better job with that messaging? And I don't think this is just important from like an electoral politics stance. So wherever one is on the spectrum there, I think that this is important for civil society, that David speaks about. And so I'm thinking a great deal about that in the coming days. And then finally, I'm going to continue to make my plug for something that would not be out of place here at the New Press, given Dionne's comments about how important racial justice frameworks have been to the books that they choose to publish for the public good. I worry that we take the wrong message about away from this election about identities. Another word for identity is that voters care about things. So it is not that I think identity became a albatross for us this election. I think that some identities just won out over others, and with the elevation of white identity voters and white identity politics, we get a Donald Trump, but we don't always have to. And that is where I'll end there. I look forward to our discussion tonight.
Thanks, Tressie, and thank you particularly for that insight about who really was the identity politics practitioner in the election that we just concluded. I want to move on to Zephyr Teachout. We're extremely grateful to Zephyr Teachout for participating in a number of New Press events over the years, most recently in a conversation with New Press author Melissa Jacoby on the topic of bankruptcy law. Zephyr is a professor of law at Fordham University, an author, and a former candidate for Congress and for governor of New York. Zephyr?
Thank you so much for having me this is an incredible panel. I'm like on the edge of my seat for everything that I'm learning, and just so honored to be with you. I appreciate what Tressie just said about the organizational aspect of the Democratic Party, but I'm going to be a little bit more blunt. I think most people who voted for Donald Trump don't like him. He's an extremely unlikable candidate, and the Democrats wholly failed to do some things that they could have done. And I'm not putting this just on Harris. I'm putting this on the party largely. The biggest thing that is not being talked about, which I'm not going to spend most of my time talking about, but is that Democrats have won, with the exception of Biden in 2020, which was a weird year, in the last 25 years when they have campaigned openly, publicly against NAFTA. That this was yet another NAFTA election. Obama campaigned against it in 2008 and then cast Romney as the outsourcer in 2012. In 2016, I was running in a swing district that swung from Obama to Trump. And the biggest issues people talked about, they didn't always use the word trade, but were around the loss of manufacturing jobs. And obviously, our global trade deals have hit Black and brown communities the hardest, but they have hit across the country. And I think the miss on trade, we did more than miss on trade. We actually played into the vision of the Democratic Party being an ultra globalization party, and not recognizing the incredible work that U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai did, along with Biden, in building a very different vision for trade. I went on about a little longer than I wanted to, but I want to talk about the future. And I think one way to think about the future is looking at 2016, a different past, not the recent electoral past. When Trump was elected in 2016, a major part of Democratic resistance was joining forces with the hope that big business would save us. Google's CEO at the time joined the protests against the racist Muslim ban. Big tech, we went to big tech, both accusing them of perhaps using algorithms that enabled extremism, but mostly begging for them to, in the language that became popular in 2016, suppress misinformation and disinformation, a sort of new language set of the era, a language set that went hand in hand with a vision of alliance with big business. Because the vision was that if we could define that dangerous content and work with big business, then we could work to oppose Trump with this bulwark of big business. Disney's another example. We cheered on as Disney resisted Trump. Well, 8 years on, every CEO, whether it's Tim Cook, or the CEO of Google or Zuckerberg made calls before the election to make sure that they were going to be close with Donald Trump. Jeff Bezos's capitulation being the most sort of gross and obvious. And perhaps that's a response to Trump saying that he would jail Zuckerberg if he opposed him, or perhaps it's just an awareness that his bread is better buttered with a deregulatory juggernaut. But what we see is big tech joining forces, not just Musk, but across the board with Donald Trump. And Bob Iger of Disney, wholly silent. So what do we take from this? Well, here's the good news here. That's the bad news. The good news is that that is not a credible playbook anymore. It is not credible to, as a group of donors did last week, host a resistance strategy session with our friends at Google. Google is not our friend at this moment. What is credible is the anti-corporate economic populism message that won biggest across the country. Pat Ryan, who overperformed Vice President Harris by more than any congressional candidate in a swing frontline district, was running as an economic populist against big business that was screwing people over. That's also true for Marcy Kaptur, who just won her legendary seat back again, despite being gerrymandered into a seat that was designed to get her out of Congress for once and for all. And you see that with Josh Riley. You see that in, I think, an extraordinary op-ed by Antonio Delgado. And you see it in the young energy around the anti-monopoly movement, economic populism around the country. So the bad news is pretty bad. The bad news is we're not just against Trump this time, we're against Trump and big business, and it's a lot more, masks off. The good news is there is a growing, young, multiracial, energetic, economic populist vein within the Democratic Party that, if we give it the chance, can really build something exciting.
Thank you so much, Zephyr. I want to move on to Elie Mystal, who is the Nation's magazine's legal analyst and justice correspondent, and the legal editor of the More Perfect podcast on the Supreme Court for Radiolab. You know him as a frequent guest commentator on MSNBC and SiriusXM. He's also the author of two No Press books, the New York Times bestselling Allow Me to Retort, A Black Guy's Guide to the Constitution, and the forthcoming Bad Law, 10 Popular Laws That Are Ruining America. Elie?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. I don't really know why people want to talk to me right now, because I am the anti David Cole. I am not the person with hope just at the moment. So I hope I don't bring the energy, the vibes down in the Zoom. And in terms of what I think is happening that people aren't capturing, or the press isn't capturing as much, what I am hearing a lot in my networks from the Black community is a level of doneness with this BS that I have simply not heard before. All right. I'm not talking about people being exhausted and despondent. There are people who are exhausted and despondent, and we can assume, as others have said, that eventually people will kind of like, wash their face off and get back to work, right? I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about the people who are angry. Lots of people are angry. Anger can be molded and used and directed in useful ways. You got a lot of anger after 2016. After 2016, you had a lot of anger and despondency in the Black community, and that was molded into something that was useful in 2018, right? That's not what I'm hearing right now. What I am hearing is the deep sense of betrayal from the Black community about what this country has done again, and frankly, what this country has done pretty much for the third time in a row. Right? We forget that, like, the COVID Biden year was a weird. I think this election proves just how weird the COVID Biden year was. How perhaps without COVID, Biden never has a chance to win that election, right? And there's a sense, from the least in my networks, that trying to save America from white folks is something that we are just about done doing, right? Now, maybe that changes in 2 years. Maybe that changes in 4 years. Maybe people, again, kind of wash their faces off and get back to work. But the level of betrayal people feel from white folks, from white women who have done this again is loud and extreme, and it's not something I'm hearing in any of the normal kind of news networks that are doing the normal kind of like postmortems, what did the Democrats do wrong, whatever. Like, that's all great, and I'm here for that. But like the Democratic Party, the opposition does not happen if you do not have the intensity and the labor of Black people, and especially Black women in this country. And right now, so many of them have saying, you broke it, you bought it. You broke this shit, y'all fix this, undo my hair. As I did. So that I think is something that we're going to have to deal with going forward. To move on to the kind of what comes next going forward part. Again, I'm not the hopeful person here, but one of the reasons why Trump is here again is because the media failed so completely in 2015 and 2016 and never figured out why, never adjusted, never recovered, never had the soul searching necessary to figure out how they installed an open white supremacist rapist in office in the first place, right? There was never the self-reflection. There was never the recollection. That never happened in 2020 either. And it certainly didn't happen in 2024. So one thing that I guess I am particularly focused on in terms of going forward is what does journalism look like, or what does it need to look like going forward? Because everything that we've been doing hasn't freaking worked at all. In fact, it has hurt. It has been bad. And I kind of feel like if you are a journalist, if you're in this Zoom, if you're here because you are a journalist, you are a writer, you are a reporter, you are a thinker, and you are not kind of deeply self-reflecting on what your value is in this society, on what your purpose is in this society at this point, then maybe you didn't learn the lessons of the last 3 election cycles. Because certainly what I'm doing right now, what I'm spending all of my spare mental energy doing, is trying to figure out, what the hell am I supposed to do? What the hell is what the hell is my purpose? What is my function as the justice correspondent for the nation? Because whatever I've been doing, it ain't work. And so going forward, I would hope that this is never going to stop. Until the media takes some measure of self-reflection and responsibility for what happened.
Elie, thanks so much. Next up is my friend Dionne, who's a syndicated columnist for the Washington Post, a university professor at Georgetown, a visiting professor at Harvard, and a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. He and his co-author, Miles Rappaport, who's a former Secretary of State for the state of Connecticut, wrote a new press book last year on universal civic participation, which is also called mandatory voting. 100% Democracy was the name of the book. EJ?
First of all, I think the kind of profound injustice that the new press was created to fight was to have to talk after David, Tressie, Zephyr, and Elie. But I'm honored to be here, and I'm honored to be here with all of you. I just want to shout out Dionne and the new press. She is a national treasure, and the new press is a national treasure. And she's not only visionary, she is a really good line and organization editor. And it was one of the great experiences I've had. So thank you all for supporting the new press. Look, I'm kind of a hope person too, I confess. I once wrote the words that hope is the virtue on which faith and love depend. And I don't think you fix any of the problems that Elie and Zephyr and Tressie and David, in his way, all describe without some of it. So I want to focus on a few things. First, words that should be repeated again and again, 14 words over the next 4 years. The words are, no person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice. Those are the first words of the 22nd Amendment. And I think it is very, very important for everybody to realize and pound into everyone's head that Donald Trump will be a lame duck president on January 20th. And the reason I think that's important is twofold. Number one, he's already joked, and we know a Trump joke is a prediction of what he wants to do, that somehow there might be a way around that. Even Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito, I think, cannot get around the words more than twice. Doesn't say consecutive terms, doesn't say anything like that. And I think that it's to fight that, but it's also, I think, to undercut this idea of Donald Trump as this all-powerful president. And I think even Republicans who have been fearful from the beginning are going to start realizing that if they want a life after Donald Trump gets out of office, they may have to think differently. And I think you saw that today with Matt Gaetz being forced out. Who would imagine that Trump would suffer a defeat so quickly? Now, yes, it's Matt Gaetz. Yes, the replacement, I hear it's Pam Bondi, the Attorney General down in Florida. This is not a great option. But this defeat, I think, matters, and that it shows that this can happen. Related to not surrendering power, the number I want everybody to have in their heads, along with those words, is the number 232,000. Kamala Harris lost this election by 232,000 votes in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. That's the total she needed to carry those three states and win the Electoral College. I think that's important because I think we can force ourselves into a degree of despondency because, yes, for all the reasons we've heard, this was, in many ways a catastrophic result. And clearly, people who see Donald Trump the way we do failed utterly to persuade enough Americans to see him that way. The fact that he became a kind of normal alternative for people who were disaffected for various reasons is a real problem. But still, 232,000 votes. I think that's very important. I think that coming to terms with the economic distress in the country, as Zephyr suggested in talking about trade, is really, really important. And it came home to me personally. I come from a mill town in Massachusetts called Fall River, which some of you may know. If some of you like driving to Cape Cod, you've driven through my town. Fall River is an old labor FDR Democratic town. Donald Trump is the first Republican candidate for president in 100 years to carry my dear town of Fall River. We were textiles, we were shirts and dresses. NAFTA wasn't very good for us, but there are a lot of trade issues that weren't very good for us for a long time. It's since 1924. And I stopped the other day. I happened to be nearby and went to my favorite diner in Fall River, Al Mack's, famous since 1910, and talked to a couple of local reporters about the anger, the disaffection, and the economic discontent there. And there are a lot of other reasons Trump won, but I think the constructive one for us to think about is where do we move forward on economics. I was really glad Tressie talked about North Carolina because that's another place where you can both see hope and danger. The hope is, just as she said, that state was organized this year in a way it hasn't been organized before. And by the way, organization matters. The states that Harris lost the least in relative to the last election included North Carolina and Wisconsin, states that were deeply organized all the way down to the local level. But it shows the danger because the Republican legislature in North Carolina has already started to move to disempower the governor and disempower the Democratic Attorney General, who were elected as part of a statewide sweep. Essentially, Harris lost the state, but the Democrats did very well down ballot. I think that's a reminder that we really need to pay attention to what happens in the states all year round and all election cycles. And I think the states are going to be very, very important this year, in the next 2 years and 4 years, in pushing back against some of what comes down from DC. I want to point out two other things. You may not feel this, you may not look this way, but Republicans admitted in this election that they lost the fight for their position in the reproductive rights debate. They stopped arguing for it. They dropped it out of their platform. Donald Trump took about 16 different positions on this issue because he knew it was very, very harmful to him. Now, that doesn't change the fact that in states where Republicans have control and think they can win, they will pass all kinds of laws, like the laws in Texas, that are so damaging. But I think it's very important to look when a side gives up on a debate. And that is clearly a debate that at the national level, they have given up on. I agree with Elie that there are real challenges to the media and the media system. And I think that it's a New Press book is in the offing here, because I think this is the election in which the mainstream media had started losing purchase in its influence on the political debate. This is the election where that really, really came home in a way. If you missed it before, you couldn't miss it here. And I think that Republicans, in the Obama years, people thought, aha, the new media is going to save progressives in the Democratic Party. I think over a period of time, conservatives have shown far more skill at dealing with the new media than progressives have. And that's a place we have a lot of work to do. So I think we should count our victories when we get them. We should recognize our victories when we see them. And the Matt Gaetz experience is a good example of that. And that you can be self-critical and hopeful at the same time. And I salute my colleagues for, even when they said they weren't hopeful, I think he gave us hope that we can move forward. So thank you all for being here tonight.
Thanks very much, EJ, and for your reference to today's withdrawal by Matt Gaetz. So one rapist down, one or more to go. I want to move finally. And by the way, as you know, EJ, we talked about my father was born in Fall River in 1924, the year that you mentioned. So I want to move on to a champion of civil rights and social justice, Congressman Jamie Raskin. Jamie is an American University constitutional law professor, the U.S. representative for Maryland's 8th Congressional District. The New Press was very proud to publish the complete transcript of the second impeachment trial of Donald Trump, led by Jamie Raskin. And a fun fact is that Dionne Wachtel and Jamie Raskin were college classmates. So Congressman Raskin, over to you.
Gary, thank you very kindly for that warm introduction, and it is wonderful to see my old buddy Dionne Wachtel and all of the great speakers assembled here. I've been taking careful notes on everything everybody's saying, because for us, it's been once more into the breach. We've been thrown back into it very quickly this week. Today, we marked up a bill in the Oversight Committee. The Republicans have to ban all DEI programs in the federal government and to make ineligible for reassignment or redeployment or rehire in those departments anybody who'd been working in those DEI programs. So they wanted to operate like a scarlet letter. Obviously, they're going to be able to pass this in the House. It'll be stopped in the Senate, but they'll be back with it in January. So get ready for that, like just a full-blown assault on DEI, which they don't really define. They know it when they see it, but they will basically say that unlike every other civil servant whose program gets closed for whatever reason, they will not have the opportunity to be rehired in another part of a department. And so they were describing it openly as a purge. So we were working on that today. More assault on home rule in the District of Columbia, with members openly floating the possibility of just a takeover of the District of Columbia, because there's a lot more jobs there that they could have for their party. And of course, as a congressman from Maryland who represents 50,000 federal workers, we're getting ready for the return of Schedule F and the attempt to just wholesale sack entire categories of federal workers and redefine their jobs as being political appointments. So there will be, up to 50,000 new extra jobs for Donald Trump's sycophants and political flunkies and, everybody there. Meantime, they're also getting ready. They're readying a mass pardon for the January 6th insurrectionists. I'm taking special delight that my former colleague, Matt Gaetz, has had to withdraw as Attorney General, although I admit that for a while I was secretly rooting for him because I didn't want him to be in the House of Representatives, and I was thinking that might be one way to get rid of him. But, he got his comeuppance. This is a guy who on January 6th itself came back to the floor of the House of Representatives. And while there was still blood and other substances all over the walls, people were injured, being rushed to the hospital, officers were writhing in agony, he came out to the floor and blamed the whole thing on Antifa. That night he did, which is presumably marching orders he got from Donald Trump, because that's what Donald Trump said when Kevin McCarthy called him on January 6th and said, you've got to call off these troops. They're in my office. Somebody's going to get killed. Someone's going to get hurt. And then Trump, you'll recall, said, oh, no, it's not my people. It's Antifa, to which Kevin McCarthy, who at that point was in fear of losing his life, said, no, these are your people, Mr. President. They're right here. And then Donald Trump said, well, maybe they just care a little bit more about a fair election than you do. So it's pretty clear where, where Matt Gaetz was getting the idea for blaming it on Antifa. But in any event, it always kind of cracked me up that they blamed it on Antifa, and yet, every Friday I'd see them, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert and Matt Gaetz getting ready to go down to the DC jail to protest for their release. And I would say, oh, you guys going to protest for the release of all those Antifa fighters again this week? Because, there's no necessary logical coherence in what they're doing. All of which is to say, we're already thrown back into this chaos with them. And we are going to try to, meet them in the House and meet them in the Senate and in the Supreme Court and all the other federal courts that we can. And we're going to have to fight to defend civil society. I was on the floor this morning fighting their rancid legislation to give the President of the United States, through the Department of the Treasury, the right to designate any 501c3 organization in the country as terrorist supporting. And then to notify them with a simple letter that the Treasury Secretary has designated you to be a terror supporting organization. You have 90 days within which to reply. You can say whatever you want, but if the answer is not convincing to the Secretary of the Secretary of the Treasury can simply decide that you are a terrorist supporting organization. That will constitute a final agency determination. At that point, you have the right to go to court. And then you have the burden of proving you're not a terrorist supporting organization. So this is obviously a complete capsizing of due process, a complete violation of First Amendment rights, and every Republican just voted for it. Most Democrats voted against it, but not all Democrats, I'm sad to say, voted against it, because simply putting the word terror or terrorist in legislation means you've got to vote for it, right? And like, this is the idiocy that we're dealing with, that people really would not read it and say, well, just look at the title. I can't vote against that title. But we're going to have to suck it up and try to explain to people what's actually in these bills and what's in the legislation. And I don't think we should patronize the public or condescend to people by assuming that they can't understand this. This is a massive violation of due process and the right of freedom of speech. And the not-for-profit community is absolutely freaking out about it. Gara could probably tell us about it. I'm sure you've been getting some of the missives and the petitions going around, but I think we had more than 200 different organizations, that wrote to us saying that this is an absolute, 5-alarm fire. So, look, we are simply going to have to recover from the shock of the election. I know there's a million explanations out there for what's going on. A lot of them are very compelling to me. I like particularly what Michael Tomasky wrote about saying that, well, some people say it's inflation, and some people say it's immigration, and some people say it's the transgender ad, and some people say this, but he says all of it is through the prism of a particular communication system which disables our ability to communicate with most of the public. And so we could have the greatest message in the world, but it doesn't get through if we're not able to communicate with our people. And when we saw erosion in different parts of our political base. But having said that, let me just say, remember, Joe Biden beat him by more than 7 million votes in 2020, just 4 years ago. And it looks like Trump may end up with 3.5 or 4 million vote margin here. The public, as EJ was saying, is overwhelmingly on our side on a whole bunch of issues, whether we're talking about gun safety or pro-choice. I think even when we were debating the DEI stuff, we saw lots of polling data saying people support diversity and inclusion as a way of making the government serve all of the people. There are ways that we can win on all of these issues. And so we should have all of the tactical and strategic discussions we can about how to improve the communications and the organizing going forward. But I went to 27 states in this campaign. I spent the entire last year going out and campaigning. I raised more than $2 million to put into the frontline campaigns. Our Democracy Summer Project had more than 1,600 young people across the country working full-time this summer in the campaigns and doing seminars. And there's a lot of things we got to do with media and social media and other stuff, but let's not denigrate in any way the work of the people who were out there every day fighting for victory. And all is not lost in any way. And we can cut the reign of Trump in half by winning the House back in 2 years. And the time to start thinking about that is right now. And we can get to work on it, and we can learn from all of the analyses that are out there. But let's be forward thinking in terms of our political organizing, and we can go forward and we can win. And remember what the great Marylander Frederick Douglass said, that, if there's no struggle, there's no progress, and the struggle may be moral, it may be physical, it may be moral and physical, but there must be struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will. There's a message to you from the great Marylander Frederick Douglass, and I yield back to you guys now.
Thank you for yielding your time back, Jamie. No, that was terrific. And I want to, the word that comes to mind right now, having listened to our 6 guests, is Dionne. I mean, if we had ended this now, it would have been enough. You would have had amazing insights that are better than most of what I've read in the kind of hot takes and lukewarm takes and all these kinds of things post-election. But we actually get the great privilege of being able to go into breakout rooms with each of these folks and to pursue further conversations, ask them questions, hear more, and so on. So we're going to move into the small discussion group part of the event where you can share your thoughts and ask your questions to your selected featured guests. In order to join your conversation, please click the word join when it pops up on your screen. This will take you to the breakout room. If you have any difficulty, please write it in the chat, and our AV person, Oscar, will help you. So we're going to now break up into small groups. Each of you will be with one of these terrific leaders. And then at the end, we'll come back for a couple of minutes. So on to the breakouts.